It was 2:03 in the morning when Daniel pulled his battered pickup truck onto the narrow drive leading up to the mansion. The engine coughed twice before falling silent, leaving him alone in the night's stillness. A mist had rolled in from the hills, cloaking the sprawling estate in a veil that made the glowing windows seem like lanterns suspended in fog. Daniel rubbed his eyes, fighting the burn of fatigue. He'd already worked 14 hours that day, 2 brake jobs, a transmission replacement, and a roadside call for a stranded couple. He'd been ready to collapse into his mattress when the dispatcher called. Emergency. Bedroom lights out. Clients insistent. Pays double. Double was why he was here. Double meant groceries for his sister and her 2 kids. Double meant maybe covering rent without another late fee. So he had swallowed his exhaustion, tossed his tool bag onto the passenger seat, and told himself, just one more job. The front door loomed like the entrance to a cathedral, tall and arched, with brass handles that gleamed even in the dim porch light. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his worn jacket. His boots left muddy prints on the marble steps, a detail that only added to the gnawing awareness that he didn't belong here. Before he could knock, the door opened. A woman stood there, framed by warm light. She was tall, draped in a robe the color of deep wine, her hair pulled loosely back as if she hadn't expected anyone to see her tonight. Her eyes were startling, pale gray, weary yet sharp, like glass fogged at the edges. "You came," she said softly, almost as if she hadn't believed he would. Daniel cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious of the grease under his fingernails. "Yeah, light problem, right." He held up his bag as if it were a passport. She nodded and stepped aside. "Upstairs. Follow me." The moment he crossed the threshold, Daniel felt swallowed by another world. The foyer was wide enough to park his truck inside. Marble tiles gleamed beneath his boots, and the air carried the faint scent of lavender and polished wood. He tried not to stare at the grand staircase curling upward, its banister glinting like ribbon in the lamplight. The woman's slippers whispered against the floor as she led him upward. "It started flickering around midnight," she said, her voice low, measured. "I tried the switch, the fuse box. Nothing helped." Daniel grunted in acknowledgement, more comfortable with wires than with words. He focused on the tools in his hands, on the job he knew how to do. When they reached the bedroom, he hesitated. The space was enormous, bigger than his entire apartment. A chandelier hung from the high ceiling like a crown, its bulbs struggling, sputtering weak light into the cavernous room. He set down his bag and pulled out a step ladder. "Shouldn't take long," he murmured. She lingered nearby, her robe cinched tightly as if to hold herself together. Her eyes never left him. Daniel climbed the ladder and pulled at the wiring. The fixture was expensive, French, maybe Italian, but poorly maintained. A loose connection, maybe corrosion. As he worked, the silence thickened. Only the faint buzz of electricity filled the room. Finally, he asked, without looking down, "Been here long?" "Too long," she said. He glanced down at her. The answer wasn't about the house. He could hear it in the hollowness of her voice. The bulb flared once, then steadied under his hand. Warm light spilled across the room, chasing shadows back into corners. Daniel exhaled, stepping down from the ladder. There. Fixed. He began packing his tools quickly, ready to escape the heavy stillness. But when he slung the bag over his shoulder and turned, she was closer than before. Her voice broke the silence, softer than the hum of the light above them. "Stay with me." For a heartbeat, Daniel thought he'd misheard. The chandelier buzzed faintly above them, newly alive, and he was still blinking against the light when her words settled in the air between them. She didn't move closer, didn't touch him. She just stood there, barefoot on the cold marble floor, her robe pulled tight around her body like armor. But her voice, it wasn't flirtation, nor command. It was fragile, like a thread stretched too thin. Daniel shifted his tool bag higher on his shoulder. His first instinct was to leave. Clients didn't ask mechanics to stay after the job was done. People like her didn't talk to people like him. "Ma'am," he began, his voice rough with fatigue, the lights fixed. "That's all you needed." Her lips trembled, not with anger, but something closer to sorrow. She lifted her chin as though she had rehearsed this moment and still hated the way it sounded. "You don't understand. I haven't spoken to anyone at this hour in years. It's always staffed during the day, or business calls. At night, when the house is quiet, there's nothing. No one. Just me." Daniel hesitated, caught off guard. He wasn't good at feelings, his own or anyone else's. He tightened his grip on the bag, the canvas rough against his palm. Not my business, he told himself. Fix the problem. Collect the pay. Leave. But he remembered the nights in his apartment, silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, his dinner eaten from a paper plate. He remembered his sister calling once, saying, "It gets lonely when the kids are asleep. Do you ever feel that way?" He hadn't answered. He set the bag down slowly. "I can stay, a little while," he said, surprising even himself. The change in her was immediate. Her shoulders dropped, her expression softened, and for the first time since he'd arrived, she looked almost human, less like the untouchable figure in silken marble, more like someone searching for a hand in the dark. "Thank you," she whispered. He dragged a chair closer to the edge of the enormous bed and sat, awkward in the lavish room. She perched on the other side, careful to keep space between them, as though she knew how fragile this arrangement was. "What's your name?" she asked. "Daniel." "Daniel," she repeated, as if tasting the word. "I'm Evelyn." The name fit her, elegant, old-fashioned, threaded with melancholy. She folded her hands in her lap. People think money solves everything. But it doesn't. It just buys more space for loneliness to echo. Daniel gave a half-smile, scratching the back of his neck. "Money buys light fixtures too fancy for their own good. Guess it keeps me in work." She laughed, small, startled, but genuine. The sound filled the vast room better than the chandelier ever could. And so they talked. Slowly at first, like strangers circling one another, then with more ease. She asked about his work, and he told her about the shop, about grease-stained afternoons, about his sister and her dream of graduating. She listened with the rapt attention of someone who hadn't had a real conversation in a long time. The minutes stretched, the night softened. Daniel forgot his exhaustion, forgot the paycheck. He only noticed the way Evelyn's gray eyes seemed less hollow now, reflecting the golden light he'd repaired. Somewhere, deep in his chest, he realized, maybe he hadn't just fixed her light tonight. Maybe, in some small way, he'd lit something inside her, too. The clock on Evelyn's bedside table ticked softly, though neither of them had looked at it in hours. The conversation had drifted from heavy confessions to lighter stories, looping between laughter and silences that no longer felt awkward. The chandelier above glowed steady, casting golden warmth. Across the cavernous room, for the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel like a ghost wandering her own house. For the first time in weeks, Daniel forgot the ache in his shoulders and the bills stacked on his counter. But dawn was coming. A pale gray seeped through the tall curtains, softening the edges of the room. Daniel noticed it first. The sight tugged at him, reminding him of the world outside, his shift starting again in a few hours, the rent due, the life that didn't belong inside these marble walls. He cleared his throat. "It's getting late. Or early, I guess." Evelyn turned her head toward the window, the faintest shadow passing over her face. "I know." She traced the rim of her teacup with one fingertip. "The night never lasts long enough when you're not alone." Daniel shifted in the chair, uncomfortable with how the words pressed against him. He wasn't supposed to matter here. He was the man who fixed the light, not the man who stayed until morning. "I should go," he said, standing. Evelyn's robe slipped slightly from her shoulder, and she pulled it back up, suddenly smaller in the vastness of the room. "Of course," she murmured. "I didn't mean to keep you." Something about the way she said it, so practiced, so resigned, hit him harder than he expected. He knew that tone. He'd heard it in his own voice on nights he told himself he didn't need anyone, that it was easier to be alone than to be disappointed. He hesitated, his hand resting on the back of the chair. "You won't be okay." Her smile was thin, fragile. "I'll be what I always am." The answer sat heavy in the air. Daniel looked at the chandelier, the light steady and unyielding now. He had fixed the wiring, but he couldn't shake the feeling that what Evelyn needed was something no tool in his bag could provide. He grabbed his jacket, shrugging it over his shoulders. His boots thudded softly on the marble as he crossed toward the door. Evelyn didn't follow. She just watched him with those gray eyes, unreadable and yet full of something he recognized too well, the ache of wanting someone to choose to stay, without asking again. His hand touched the doorknob. He should leave. He should get in his truck, drive back to his world, and forget this house and the woman inside it. That was the safe thing. The logical thing. But then he heard her breath catch, barely audible, a small sound, but it froze him in place. He turned back. She hadn't moved. She was staring down at her hands, twisting her fingers together. Vulnerability clung to her like the robe did, fragile, trembling, but real. Daniel swallowed hard. He wasn't a man who belonged in mansions. He wasn't a man who could give her the life she had been born into. But maybe that wasn't what she needed. Slowly, he let go of the doorknob and walked back into the room. He sat down again, his presence quiet but solid. Evelyn's eyes flickered up, surprise giving way to relief so deep it almost broke him. "I can stay a little longer," he said softly. And outside, the dawn kept rising, but inside the room, it felt, for once, like the night might linger a little longer, just for them. By the time the first rays of sunlight burned away the mist outside, Daniel and Evelyn had fallen into a comfortable silence. He sat slouched in the chair, half dozing, while she leaned against the headboard, her robe wrapped tightly around her. They hadn't touched, not once, yet the air between them felt charged, as if even breathing had become a shared act. The spell broke with the sound of footsteps. A knock at the bedroom door. "Madam, shall I bring breakfast?" The voice was crisp, professional, staff. Evelyn stiffened, her eyes darting toward the door. For a heartbeat, she looked like a child caught with a secret. Then she smoothed her expression into something neutral. "No," she called, her voice steady. "Not yet." The footsteps receded, but the moment lingered. The mansion, which had felt like theirs in the dark hours of night, suddenly reminded Daniel of what it truly was, hers. Not his. He was an intruder in a world that didn't belong to him. He straightened, rubbing a hand over his face. "I really should go now." Evelyn turned toward him quickly, as if the thought of him leaving now stung more than it had at dawn. "Wait." She hesitated, her fingers curling against the sheets. "It's strange. For years, I've been surrounded by people, assistants, chefs, drivers. Yet last night was the first time I actually felt seen." Her voice faltered at the edges. "Do you know what that's like, Daniel? To live in a house filled with everything except company." He did know. He thought of his one-bedroom apartment, the peeling paint on the walls, the way the silence pressed in at night like an extra weight. But his loneliness had always been a byproduct of poverty. Hers was dressed in silk, but it was the same emptiness. He met her eyes. "Yeah, I know." The words hung between them. Then Evelyn gave a soft laugh, almost bitter. "And yet, come daylight, I suppose you'll walk out of here, and I'll go back to being the lonely woman in the big house." Daniel looked at her, really looked. Not at the silk robe, not at the marble and chandeliers, but at the woman beneath all that, pale from sleepless nights, fragile from carrying invisible weight. He wanted to say something, but what could he offer? He wasn't rich, or polished, or anyone who could belong in her world. So he stood and gathered his bag. "I can't promise I'll fix everything," he said finally. "But if you call again, not for a light, but just, for company, I'll come." Evelyn's breath caught. She didn't answer right away, but her eyes softened, shimmering with something unspoken. Gratitude, maybe. Hope, perhaps. The sunlight grew stronger, filling the room with gold. Daniel moved toward the door, but before he reached it, Evelyn's voice stopped him. "Daniel." He turned. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not for the light. For staying." Something twisted in his chest, equal parts ache and warmth. He nodded once, then slipped out of the room. The mansion's halls seemed even larger in the daylight, each step echoing his exit. Staff moved quietly in the distance, none of them sparing him more than a passing glance. To them, he was just the mechanic who'd been called for an odd job. Nothing more. But to Evelyn, maybe he had been something different. As he stepped outside into the morning air, Daniel squinted at the rising sun. He didn't know if he'd ever see her again, or if this night would fade into memory like a dream. But he knew one thing. Something had shifted, both in her and in him. And for once, the road ahead didn't feel quite so lonely. 3 days passed. Daniel threw himself into work, engines, oil changes, busted carburetors, but no matter how hard he tried, his thoughts wandered back to the mansion on the hill. Back to Evelyn. Back to the quiet of her voice when she'd said stay with me. It unsettled him. People like her didn't need people like him. He was a grease-stained mechanic who lived paycheck to paycheck, while she owned a house that could swallow his entire neighborhood. Whatever had happened that night should have stayed there, locked inside the silence of 2 a.m. And yet, On the fourth evening, just as Daniel was closing up the shop, his phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. He almost didn't answer, but something told him he already knew. Daniel. The voice was soft, tentative. Evelyn. He swallowed, suddenly aware of the oil under his fingernails, the sweat on his collar. Yeah, it's me. There was a pause. He could hear her inhale, then, it's silly. I know. But, could you come by? The light's fine, it's just, her voice trailed off, unsteady. I don't want to be alone tonight. Daniel leaned against the workbench, staring at the floor. Logic screamed at him to say no. To protect himself. To keep the line between their worlds clear. But his heart, the part of him that remembered her gray eyes softening in the glow of the chandelier, betrayed him. I'll be there, he said quietly. When he arrived, the mansion looked different than it had that first night. No mist cloaked it now, it loomed sharp against the evening sky, every light blazing like a fortress of glass. Evelyn met him at the door, not in her silk robe this time but in a simple dress, pale blue, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked younger, less untouchable, and far more nervous. I wasn't sure you'd come, she admitted. I wasn't sure either, he said honestly. This time, she didn't take him straight to her bedroom. Instead, she led him into a sitting room filled with books and soft armchairs. A fire burned in the hearth, crackling against the silence. She gestured for him to sit, and for a while they just existed. No tools, no pretense, just two people in a room. Eventually, Evelyn spoke. I keep wondering if I'm being selfish. Calling you here, when I know you have your own life. She turned toward him, her expression fragile. But the truth is, Daniel, you made me feel human again. And I can't remember the last time someone did that. Daniel looked into the fire. He didn't know how to answer. He wasn't sure he had the right to. But when he finally met her eyes, he saw the same loneliness reflected back, dressed in silk but aching all the same. You're not selfish, he said slowly. Everyone needs somebody, even if it's just to sit in silence. Her shoulders relaxed, the tension in her posture easing. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze never leaving his. Then sit with me a while. And so he did. They sat as the fire burned low, as the night deepened. There were no grand declarations, no promises. Just a mechanic and a millionaire, bound by something neither had expected but both quietly craved, the comfort of not being alone. The third time Daniel came, he didn't need an excuse. No broken light, no phone call,